I think it hit me my first year in 2016. We had a couple of students who unfortunately committed suicide. But in my first 2 years, we had a couple more, and one made national news. It took place in front of one of the Walmart supercenters. And I think at that moment, it was, as a leader, it was me reflecting on, like, what are we doing to address this issue? We did everything right in that case, right? We had a teacher and a coach that identified an issue with the student. The dad, the parent, was doing what they were supposed to do. We had appointments set up for mental health support. But as you know, nationally, that support isn't there. And so it wasn't a high priority. I think at the end of the day, if we can convince Fortune 500 CEOs to tell politicians to invest and see this as an investment and not a cost, I think we'll be far better off. But the problem with politicians is they see everything as a cost and they don't see mental health as an investment. I just find it ironic that most politicians have the best insurance, and it's a lifetime of insurance for them after a certain number of years, but they can't see that being done for our society and for kids.
This is the Engaging Leadership Show, where we uncover the stories and strategies behind successful educational leadership. Students need to be mentally sound before they can be academically sound. In today's episode, we're going to be going through some hard talk about the realities of social emotional learning and mental health within students, but also within teachers. And particularly, we're going to do a sidetrack into the teacher shortage and how this district has been employing some really innovative partnerships with their universities to be able to solve that. All of this to follow in today's episode of the Engaging Leadership Show. Today's guest is recognized for his skills as a turnaround administrator. He's also a champion for mental health and has been serving in his current capacity for over 8 years. It's a great privilege and honor for me to have in our studios today Dr. Michael Cardona. He's the Superintendent of Schools at San Marcos CISD. So welcome to the show, Michael.
Hey, thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
Well, thanks for joining me. And tell us a little bit more about San Marcos and what kind of community is it? What kind of school district is it? You've been there for 9 years. You've seen a lot that's going on.
It's a growing community. So we're located on the I-35 corridor, about 30 miles south of Austin, Texas, Central Texas, 30 miles north of San Antonio, Texas. So we sit right at the gateway to the hill country. And so we're surrounded by two large urban areas, which we like to say gives us big town access and also big town problems. And a lot of people don't know Texas State University, the largest teachers college, is here in San Marcos. And we have a great president here, Dr. Kelly Danfus, and we'll talk about that later, some of the relationships we've built. But we're also a district that's 80% kids in poverty. We are a very mobile district because of that I-35 mobility, the corridor. And so that comes with a lot of challenges of educating children, the whole child support system.
When you talk about being very mobile, expand a little bit more about what that means for you guys.
Well, listen, education for me, we used to talk about mobility rates in Texas as kids coming into a school and then leaving. But if you look at the Texas Education Agency's definition of mobility, it actually ties attendance into mobility. So it's kids missing a certain number of days of school. And so we are very mobile community. A lot of our campuses are up in the 20% mobility, meaning a large percentage of their kids miss more than the number of days that the state of Texas allows, which comes with some issues of getting them caught back up and educating them.
So my understanding from what you're saying is mobility here is almost very technical and related to attendance as well in the state of Texas. And you're linking this a little bit to the urban centers that you're almost smack and sandwiched right in between. What are the patterns that you're seeing that geographical position has been impacting the mobility and attendance that you're seeing?
That's a great question. I think it's something that we don't learn about as superintendents, and that's this gentrification issue, the communities being pushed out because of the rising costs. Austin has some tremendously high costs for rent and housing. San Antonio is getting the same way. And so those families move out. And if you have looked at San Marcos in particular, like we're 70% of our family's rent, which is a tremendous amount. And so I would say about 5 years ago, we did a study with our demographer to look at that in particular. And of that 70%, more than 50% of those families were rent dependent, meaning they spend a large amount of their funds just to stay where they're at. And so for us as school leaders, that requires you to look at the campus makeup, not just from an accountability standpoint, but who's living in your area, are multi-families living in your area, and so forth. And so it really has allowed us as campus principals to understand their communities and the role that mobility plays. And I think for me as superintendent, I think I've become more in tune with city policies on development. I sit on the economic development and the planning committees, which gives me great insight. Like I said, we weren't trained to do that, but I need to know what businesses are coming in, what apartments, because that affects our zoning. And one or two or three apartment complexes of a certain kind coming into a certain school can overwhelm that school pretty quickly if we're not cognizant of being purposeful in how we plan out a year, 2 years out.
Yeah, it does sound, and especially where you're at, you have a little bit of the derived human population from both of those urban centers. And depending on what happens in both of those centers, it's likely to have an impact on you. And Texas is a growing state overall, like economically. And those two urban centers are big drivers of that growth. I'm sure it's never a dull moment for you. When it comes to thinking about the impact on not just the students, but even on the staff, like Texas overall as a state, and maybe nationwide, this is an issue. We're all facing a little bit of a teacher shortage. Tell me a little bit more about how that impacts you and what you guys have been thinking about dealing with that.
That's a great question. We want to keep our great people, but housing affects them as well. The cost of insurance. We're really blessed here in San Marcos to have a school board that has contributed to teachers' insurance on top of what we allocate. So we pay about $450 more for every employee that takes our district insurance, which is a great savings and can help with teacher retention. But we do have to compete with San Antonio, Austin, some of the larger districts around us who just physically have more kids, meaning they have physically more money, meaning they can stipend their teachers more, they can pay them more. And so we have to look at what else we can do, providing our teachers laptops, having them with technology-rich classroom environments, having campus cultures that are really putting teachers at the forefront of everything we do, because at the end of the day, it's our teacher force that drives our academic outcomes. And then we can set up systems to support them in professional development and leadership development and all that. But we have to think of teacher retention in terms of like we do with students and providing them access to certain things so that they don't have to worry about those things. And the one thing we can't overcome is time. And so if we can make life great for our teachers here and can have them be local, they don't have to spend time. You're from California, the traffic patterns of sitting in traffic, that weighs in where people work and how they live and quality of life. We have a great HR department. We've really focused a lot on just listening to our teachers and taking care of them. Our HR department right now is at one of our elementary campuses doing their HR listening and learning tours. They go to every campus and everybody from HR is there, and teachers don't have to come to us. They can go ask them insurance questions, Social Security questions, marriage questions, things like that. If some of them need some employee assistance, we have that available. That's one of the tools we use that our board pays for that's free for our teachers. And I think that shows that we understand that there's just a lot more to teaching and learning. We are a people-driven business, and we have to take care of our people and take care of our students. That's our ultimate customer is the kid. And we are a system. If there's any kink in any part of that, the whole system gets thrown off. And so it's constant looking and reflecting on how we can better serve our people.
Those sound like very progressive policies and supports that you have for the teaching workforce. For those of us listening who may not know, just to get a sense of the scale, like roughly how many teachers does this impact and across how many students do you have?
So we're about 8,300 students, 1,300 total staff, 600 teaching staff, and then 700 non-exempt teachers, your custodians, your child nutrition workers, transportation drivers. Central office is about 50 staffing units of that 1,300. And so we're talking a good size organization, a lot of people. And since COVID, I would say our turnover rates of teachers is probably about 100 to 120 teachers a year. We're losing about 20% that move. They either move, they spouses move, some get out of the education system, some for performance, but that's what we're dealing with every year when we're planning. And that doesn't include the hourly employees. They probably turn over more, but we have hourly employees throughout the year that come in and come out. But those are even hard to staff. Teaching units, we consider those teaching units, like the bus driver for us is as important as the teacher, because you don't have a good bus driver and makes that first impact, those parents are going to let you pretty quickly. And then if you don't make the bus drivers happy, they can go anywhere up and down the aisle. Bus drivers happy, they can go over at Amazon if they want to.
Yeah, I think that's a very enlightened approach to thinking about staff. And I like what you said about the whole system. Essentially, if your mission is to be able to drive student support and achievement, the system that delivers that outcome needs to be solid throughout. And exactly down to every single person who contributes to that system. So you mentioned professional development and PD for the teaching staff. Some of the things that you brought up when we were chatting before were quite interesting and innovative. And you also mentioned Texas State University. And what are some of these like longer term programs that you've put in place to help to address this need to, first of all, like you've got 100, 120 that you've got to recruit every year just to stay where you are. But as the enrollment population grows, you're going to need to grow that as well. So retention is just as important as new hiring. So how do you think about this?
I think things changed a couple of years ago with Texas State when we got a new university president, and he's an innovator. He fundamentally believes that if a student is college ready, that they need to be staying at their local university. They should be able to attend their local university, and we should have multiple pathways to get kids there. But he also looks at things holistically. He's an interesting story in and of himself. He'd be one interesting to interview. He is a foster kid who grew up in Canada in the foster care system, and then worked his way through junior college, was a prison guard, and started teaching in high school. And he's worked his way up to be a university president. So he understands also there are multiple pathways to be successful. And so for us, the teacher residency program, which is a year-long teacher residency program, started with two schools. Two of our elementary schools really wanted to focus on getting the student teachers in for a whole year, and then getting a mentor teacher. And then that allowed the principals to really see these young up-and-coming teachers. You can get an advantage on recruiting them. And our principals are very selfless. They weren't just recruiting them for their own campus. That was number one. But number two, if they found a teacher that they didn't have an opening for, it was calling their colleagues to say, hey, I got this teacher resident here. You might want to reach out to them. And then we've grown that program to include secondary teacher residents. So we have residents that are at both middle schools and then also at our high school. And I say that's important and innovative because most everybody focuses on elementary teacher residents, right? The K-6 model. But it took a university to change the way they offer coursework for their students so that we could get the secondary residents into both middle schools and high schools. And I think that allows. Last year, our new principal hired 3 of the high school residents as social studies teachers because they were fantastic. And she has another 9 there this year, and the other 9 are down at both middle schools. And so I think that just gives us the advantage that not a lot of other districts have. We still do the traditional student teacher model, the half semester. It's not that we're not doing that. And then finally, we're looking at in the future targeting our student population to potentially who want to go into the teaching realm to move into that pathway that where they come back and they're student residents. And just so for the general public, we don't use grant money, we use our funds to pay the residents when they're in the classroom. So if they're actually teaching, they get $105 non-certified teacher pay for that day, which I think at the end of the day helps reduce college debt, which we all know is a big issue. And so we're not just trying to help. Yeah, we want better academic outcomes by hiring the best teachers, but we also understand we are part of the Texas State University ecosystem too. And as they go, so we go. And I jokingly used to tell this to the previous president: if you want to be a Research One university, we need to be a Research One school district. And so now we have Dr. Danfus, who fundamentally believes that mantra and is putting the weight of the university behind trying to change the things for our students in a better way, but not just students, but for our staff members as well. I think we have 5 special education teachers who the university is paying for to get their master's in special education all throughout the system. And then we have probably, I would say, 40 professors from the university in some form or fashion working with our schools, either examining child nutrition at early elementary education, or they're examining play-based curriculum, or we've got one studying our 3rd, 4th, and 5th grade math scores and teaching efficacy. And so they're putting the weight of the research-based practices behind our district to help us help our kids, which I think is really impressive.
Yeah, it sounds like a really good partnership. You're getting that increased rigor and almost like an external audit on some of these instructional practices to help to improve them. At the same time, you're also building your talent pipeline for teachers and I guess giving existing staff something aspirational to gun for if that's what they want to go for. What kind of impact have you seen this have on teacher retention, even just climate within the schools? Yeah, especially on the teaching staff.
Yeah, I think for our schools that have done the residency model, I think the student residents they've held on to, they're still with us. We're in year 3 now. So that the first 2 campuses were elementary. We still have some of those residents that are teaching. Now they are now becoming, for next year's cohort, the mentor teachers. When we do a mentorship or program, we typically only focus on the first year teachers. We have a couple of curriculum people that really said, hey, we want to make this work. Let's do a 3-year kind of program to onboard our new teachers. And then after their 3rd year, then we can move them into, if they want to, be mentor teachers for those new residents. And so this next year, some of our first year residents are going to become mentors for kids who 3 years ago, they were in college, probably with some of them taking classes. And so I think we're building a pipeline of teacher leadership that I think empowers teachers to say, hey, I really am making a difference. We can stay here. I can stay here. And one of the reasons why stress is a big reason why people leave the education field, but I think lack of support from leadership is another big reason. And so this program runs because we have some fantastic principals who are really owning this residency program and supporting not only the residents, but their own teachers and teacher leadership development as they're going along. And then that spreads throughout the culture. It's a good problem when other principals are like, when do I get the residency model? And you're like, it's a scalability issue. There's only a few supervising teachers, so we have to be purposeful in how we do the things we do. But it is a testament that it's working when all the other principals want that same model.
And that's so important because if you can get that, the teaching layer and your staff to feel motivated, to feel excited about what they do every day. Teaching is a very mission-driven profession, as I'm sure when you've experienced. And layering on top of that level of leadership support, I think is so powerful. And it really feels like the teachers feel like they can make a lot of impact on the students. They feel a greater sense of efficacy. And it shows on the students. And one of the things that we were talking about was just mental health, because it's something that we don't talk about a lot, or maybe don't talk about enough, especially for students. And how do you think you would describe the importance of mental health within San Marcos?
I think it hit me my first year in 2016. We had a couple of students who unfortunately committed suicide. But in my first 2 years, we had a couple more, and one made national news. It took place in front of one of the Walmart supercenters. And I think at that moment, as a leader, it was me reflecting on what are we doing to address this issue. We did everything right in that case, right? We had a teacher and a coach that identified an issue with the student. The parent was doing what they were supposed to do. We had appointments set up for mental health support, but as nationally, that support isn't there. And so it wasn't a high priority. 6 weeks, we can get you an appointment. Unfortunately for this young man, and he was a junior in high school, unfortunately for that young man, that support system failed him, and he didn't have 6 weeks to wait to see a counselor. And I've mentioned our board before. They're very supportive. They ask a lot of questions. They are very in tune with what's going on. They're very student-centered leaders. And when I went to the board president and said, I'm going to propose we have social emotional counselors at the secondary schools. Their caseload is mental health. They deal with small groups, individuals. They work directly with kids. They don't have an academic caseload. The board approved them unanimously. We have 5 SEL counselors. We got a state grant through Texas Education Association where we have the 3 clinical therapists. We have one at the early elementary center, bottom pre-K. We have one at our high school, which is a high need area. And then we have one at one of our elementary schools that has the space and capacity to bring families in. And then on top of that, we layered in communities and schools. And we're fortunate to have communities and schools in every campus. And so they kind of service our tier 3 students, our most at-risk families, 80 to 90 per campus, depending on what their caseload can hold. And what we've seen is we haven't had any, I hate to say that, we haven't had any successful suicide attempts. During COVID, we did, and that's because the kids didn't have access to that support. And so it shows that the support works when you have it. It's personal because you and I talk. I have a child that suffers from mental health issues that I've had to take off work and go take care of him and go deal with them. And I think if we can get out of our vulnerability or our ego, I guess, and just talk about these things, I think it makes it a lot easier. For me, I'm very fortunate, again, that I have a school board that really is not the norm. They really support our whole child support. Now, they do expect us to get our ratings, but they also understand the mental health aspect. And if we can't stabilize kids, you can put them in front of a math teacher. I don't care how great that math teacher is. That kid is not in a good headspace. They are not only not going to do well, but they will disrupt the learning for everybody else when they start doing some outcrying. And so I think we've put some really good systems to help stabilize that. I wish our state would step up and fund this to where it should be funded at. And I say this to politicians, right? They ask me these questions, and my answer to them simply is, well, you don't have a problem passing a policy or a bill that funds a prison system at $30,000 an inmate. If we funded at the front end of the system, $30,000 a kid, and provided them all the support, we wouldn't have that $30,000 expenditure at the back end with the prison system. But I would suspect that they don't want that because people are making money off third grade reading scores and looking at prison beds and things like that. And so I think it's easy not to address mental health because then you can blame the school system for all the woes that are happening in society when that doesn't go right.
That's such an important insight. And yeah, it really calls the question, like, how are we allocating resources as a society? And are we channeling them more to a cure or to prevention, right? And that's one of the hardest things about mental health, especially, and you mentioned the high need areas in high school and so on. There's so much of that stigma. I think even after all these years of talking about it, there's still that stigma of, I don't want to go see a counselor. Or I think that I'm alone as a student, right? I think I'm alone facing this. They wouldn't understand. What do they know? How do you break through that systematically?
I think you just keep having conversations. One of the things, I have a faith-based group of pastors that I meet with, and we meet quarterly. We meet 4 times a year. We don't try to take up people's time, but we have different topics. And one of them was on mental health about a year ago. And I get the religious aspect of, I was born and raised Catholic, and we have just frank conversations. And I said, there's a place for everything. I understand the religious part of your hesitancy when you preach about this. I said, but there needs to be something physically done on earth with people intervening with our kids. I've been known to be political, but if we call ourselves a Christian nation, then we need to act like a Christian nation. And we need to address things that make us uncomfortable. I think we host suicide prevention classes. We, typically have about 100 families that will show up. We have a great working relationship with our Rotary Club. We have child trafficking where we bring them into the schools to talk to our community about child trafficking. We talk to our faith-based pastors about, on top of religion, what else can we do in the schools? And I've never had a pastor not, they all want to serve, they all want to help, and so they understand that. Try to stay away from politics in the school system, but the politics gets involved with us, I'll get right back involved with it. But I think the more we talk and can convince politicians, I think at the end of the day, if we can convince Fortune 500 CEOs to tell politicians to invest and see this as an investment and not a cost, I think we'll be far better off. But the problem with politicians is they see everything as a cost and they don't see mental health as an investment. I just find it ironic that most politicians have the best insurance and it's a lifetime of insurance for them after a certain number of years, but they can't see that being done for our society and for kids.
Yeah, it's almost like that investment in mental health is societal insurance against a lot of ills that can come out of like poor mental health. As a school system, how do you deal with this, especially when you see, for example, like discipline issues that start emerging? Do you have a mental health lens to that or a social emotional learning lens that has both the discipline intervention as well as that an intervention that's more to support the mental health of that individual? And how do you, as a system, think through, is this guy just playing the mental health card to get out of detention or something?
Yeah, and you do have that every now and then, but I think you have good administrators and teachers. And I hate to admit this, we still are a system that's learning. We learn every year, but we did mental health first aid with all of our teachers this past summer, which is a huge investment. And I think we probably should have done it 6 years ago, but we finally did get to it. But I think that's step number one. I think when we showcase and show our teachers the importance of them being the front lines of identifying potential issues with students, I think families trust teachers first. So I think that if we get them trained right in how to identify, and then they can pass that on to our counselors and our administrators, I think having conversations together, I think makes for a better system and makes for better outcomes for kids. And then we can divert, I think, having communities and schools at the table with our administrators. So communities and schools, they meet with our leadership teams on a weekly basis to go over caseloads, right? We do the multi-tier systems of support. We do all the stuff you're supposed to do across the country. But I think we have a director of guidance and social emotional learning, Adriana, who's very in tune to this. And so she has her counselors talking to administrators. And I think at the end of the day, we have to be more stubborn than our parents and bring them in earlier, because our parents, in some cases, I was not raised, right? You and I talked about this. I was not, like, I never knew why I got physically ill before a basketball or a baseball game. I did not know that I was having anxiety. And I think the more we can get our parents to understand, like, maybe your kid's behaving this way at home because there's a stressor at school, exam, performance, whatever it is, then I think we're better off. And I think we also have the unique situation here in San Marcos where we have parent liaisons who go out and meet with parents. And so I think they've been trained on this. We are in a pretty progressive area, and we're fortunate that when COVID hit and we had some mental health issues, the University of Texas and the Dell Children's Medical Center, who's known throughout the country, opened up their online T-chat system for mental health. And so we were one of the first districts to get access for our entire student population during COVID. And that's really because of a relationship we had with the University of Texas at Austin for college readiness, ironically, right? We had a couple of Gear Up grants with them. And then when COVID hit, they were like, hey, we have this mental health online support system we're building with Dell Children's. We can open it up to your whole district. We're like, let's do it. Let's figure it out. And so I think at the end of the day, I think if we as superintendents get out of our own way sometimes, the people we work with and that we hire, that we identify as talented people, they can do some things if we just clear some roadblocks for them that will benefit kids
Yeah, and
and staff. Let's say staff too, because
yeah,
our HR department does a lot with employee assistance. And I still go back and remember that COVID time. And every week I had a online Zoom call with all 1,200 teachers. And it was really just listening and just being there online just to be there. And I think that calmed a lot of people's anxieties as well. And so I think if we sometimes get out of our own way, we can do a lot of great things for kids.
yeah. And something that you said really hit home for me. When you think about if we're committing to building that foundational support for mental health for the students, that involves not only the trained professionals in each school building that you have, it's the teachers, the parents who are at the front line interacting with the kids every day. They are the ones to flag out and refer cases when they observe them to the professionals. And that training involves resources. It's not easy, especially if you have a relatively mobile family population. Like that training is going to have to be done like a lot with the new families that come in. How do you think if you were to grade yourself right now and the district on the ability that it was to deliver on your vision of providing that foundational mental health support for kids, say 1 to 10, with 10 being like we're the best in the world and 1 being like, oh, we have a long way to go? And you're an honest guy. I want to put this question to you. Where do you think San Marcos is today?
I think we're about a 5 out of 10
No
because I think,
way.
yeah. So I look at things from an academic perspective. So if we did things, we would be a A or B rated district. And I think if we were a B or A rated district, I think we would have the data to show that we have stabilized our system in a way that allows kids to focus on academic. And I think if I look at our academic data, our third grade reading scores, I look at kindergarten readiness, I think we're about halfway there. It takes so much time to build these systems and then sustain them. And I'm going to be honest, I think if you were to have asked me this question in 2019, I would say we were a 7 because we were well on our way to be a B district. And then COVID hit and it really decimated the work we did, being out of school for about a year. And so we regress back. And it's not that anybody's not doing what they're supposed to do. It's not to disparage any person, but that epidemic just killed our system and all the progress we had made. And so I think if you ask me in 2 more years, I think we'll be about an 8. But we're going to see this year the third graders are taking their reading and math tests, and they're the COVID generation. And so I think we're going to see not great scores because we're still trying to stabilize that whole group of students.
Thank you for that very frank assessment. And just switching gears slightly, thinking about you yourself and your personal journey as a leader, not just alone at San Marcos. You've been there more than 8 years. And yet in this conversation, it already feels like very clearly, like hearing from you, it sounds like you've got so much more that you want to achieve, even after 8 to 9 years. Where does that come from as a leader? How do you keep things fresh, even having been in the same role for 8 years?
I would say, I'm going to keep telling them, our school board, they'll tell you that they cause me grief sometimes. And it's not really grief. They ask me the questions we should be able to answer. So it's not, they're really just an amazing board in terms of understanding whole child development. But I think the drive really comes from my mom and my dad. My wife pushes me. She doesn't treat me like a superintendent. She knows how to put me in my place, and you need that as a superintendent. But my mother, I watched her work ethic, and I watched her drive, and I watched her go to college over 3 decades. And when I say 3 decades, she started in the 60s, went through the 70s, and finished in the 80s. And she was always an executive assistant. And never got promoted. And my dad had some issues when he was growing up and dropped out in 8th grade because of economics. He was a migrant worker, but went back and got his associates and was always a mechanic because just some other things that happened in his life. But they always stressed the importance of never being satisfied with where you're at, always being not afraid to make mistakes. They were hard on me. They were those parents, man. They would scold me, chastise me, paddle me, whatever. But I think they just instilled in me like, hey, it's okay to mess up, keep going, keep push forward. And at the end of the day, I think as superintendent, if I can't encourage teachers and people to make mistakes, to do what's right by kids, failure is a part of our system. I get it. I'm going to be the one that's going to be terminated because of scores, not for the most part, not teachers. So if I can make teachers feel comfortable in iterating, I think we get better as a system. Last year, we started using organizational health inventories on all our campuses. And if you're familiar with those, that's about what teacher perceptions are about. Like, how do they feel empowered? Do they feel they have the autonomy? Do they feel they have the support? Does the leadership communicate up and down and across the organization correctly? And that's important to me. Superintendents are always told what they need to hear so that they don't get angry, right? Their direct reports always tell them the things they need to hear so they don't question the system. I want to understand what teachers, they're the drivers of change. The principals are the drivers of change. I can set the vision with the board. They can give me my guidance on what to do. But at the end of the day, teachers need to feel empowered. They need to feel like they're wanted. They need to feel like they have the autonomy to make the changes. Now, we have to have centralized systems of curriculum and support and data, and PD that goes with it. Teachers are intuitive. They don't like failure. If they see X percentage of kids not do well on assessment, they're not going to ask the kids. They're going to question themselves first. And we really want to be a system that encourages everybody to just move in the right direction. And if we make mistakes, we fix them and then we go on.
Have you always seen yourself as a leader from the first time that you entered the profession onwards?
I don't see myself as a leader now. I think I had really good mentors, and my parents are mentors, and I had really good superintendents and principals who really chastised me and held me to a high standard. And I think they believed more in me than I believed in myself. Remember, I talked about that anxiety thing. I tell kids when I talk to kids and when I meet with kids, and I have a superintendent leadership advisory group that's 5th grade through 12th grade students. And the first session is usually my leadership journey. And I tell kids, I suffer from anxiety. I get super nervous when I go to a board meeting. If I got to speak before the Chamber of Commerce, I get sick to my stomach. I can't eat that whole morning. And so I think if kids see being like them, I think they will go through the wall for you and they will do whatever. So I've never seen myself. I have people tell me the impact of a superintendent, but I just fundamentally have always believed in the collective leadership. I know I have positional power. I know that when I walk into a building, I make people uncomfortable because of that positional power. But I would like to think at the end of the day that I treat the custodian, which was my dad, the same way that I treat the CEO. And there's no difference. And sometimes there's a little bit of inappropriate language mixed in there. But I think if you were to ask the people here in this district, they would tell you, yeah, there sometimes the new teachers who don't know me, they're like, oh, that's a superintendent. But the teachers who have been with me for 9 years, they'll shoot me an email. Some have my number. They'll shoot me a text. I'll get a random email during COVID, like, hang in there. We know you're facing the gunfire right now, but just hang in there. You're doing a great job. Obviously, I have a board that believes I'm doing a good job, but they still critique me at the beginning of year, middle year, and end of year to make me feel better and then to also make me get better.
Yeah, but it sounds like that's a healthy flow of feedback back and forth. If you're receiving those, which speaking to you, I can get that sense that you're a leader for the people and of the people. I'm always inspired by guests like yourself and many that have been on the show and how close to the ground that you are. And thank you for sharing that. I have just one last question for you before I let you go. So you've obviously been in leadership for a while, and for someone who's new in administration, new in educational leadership, and thinking about taking that next step, or someone who's maybe not like just considering moving into administration, how would you advise them to think about their career and their motivations for doing so?
I think whether you're a principal or you're moving into superintendency, I think the answer I always give is unless you were born and raised in that community and grew up in that community, always understand that you are a visitor in that community. And you need to understand the stories that families bring into that building in order for you to be a better leader. Like you are there to serve that community, but you are the visitor. And if you go into that community and use words like I, my, you're not going to be successful because most great leaders really take a team approach. Like they get in the emergency situation, you got to be the leader, but it's a we for the most part.
I love that. And how applicable that is to any leader, really, at any stage in their career, that you're really a visitor and having that respect, first and foremost, for the people that you're serving and you're serving those people. I think that's such an important reminder for all of us. Thank you very much, Michael, for being with us. And all of you, thank you so much for listening. That's all we have today for the Engaging Leadership Show. And I hope that you continue to keep leading with purpose.
Thank you for having me.
And that's all for the Engaging Leadership Show today. If these stories resonated with you at all, head over to engagingleadershipshow.com, all one word, where you can subscribe for free to receive more leadership stories and strategies every week. Also, at that link, you can access the archive of all the featured episodes we published in summary form. It's a veritable treasure trove of educational leadership wisdom distilled for your learning pleasure. Once again, the link is engagingleadershipshow.com. Sign up today to receive the next summary this very week. Until next time, keep leading with purpose and passion, and I'll see you in the next episode.